Growing older results in a reduction in your psychomotor speed. This is the speed with which you can make a specific cognitive response. And this slows with age in all situations, but especially in ambiguous situations. And this occurs because older adults, when they're faced with these uncertain circumstances, it just takes them a little bit longer to decide whether or not they need to respond. And then if they decide they do need to respond, then they have to consider the different alternatives that they can pick from. And this is just one possible explanation for why older adults do tend to have higher driving fatality rates. And the biological mechanism of this slowing of the psychomotor speed is decline in the brain's white matter, which aids, faster neural transmission. That's that myelin sheath that we see in the central nervous system. Now, this decline in psychomotor speed has obvious consequences, like when it comes to driving a car. There are various tests that we can give out regarding whether drivers should be allowed to continue driving, such as the Useful Field of View test, or UFOV test. This refers to the area from which one can extract visual information in a single glance without turning one's head or moving one's eyes. So it's something that older individuals obviously won't be able to perform as well on as younger individuals. And just to give you an example of the kinds of tests that we can do, the American Automobile Association has developed a standardized screening that we call the RoadWise Review. And this assesses 8 functional areas when it comes to driving skill, such as leg strength, neck flexibility, high contrast acuity, visual acuity in general, working memory, compensation for missing information, visual search, and visual processing speed. Now, one of those that I mentioned was working memory. And if you don't remember memory, if it's been a while since you've taken Psych 101, working memory refers to those processes and structures that are involved in holding information temporarily and using it when it comes to like problem-solving situations, like decision-making or learning, for example. Now, for an adult, it's relatively small in capacity, about 7 plus or minus 2 bits. And like I said, it's a temporary thing. If you have something up there and you get distracted momentarily, it could be lost in just a moment. Now, this small capacity and this temporary storage is further reduced with old age. Poor working memory and this slowdown in psychomotor speed are massive influences when it comes to cognitive performance. These are the primary reasons why we see those stereotypical cognitive deficits in most older individuals. But besides this working memory, we also see some other memory issues in elders, such as problems with their long-term memories, not the temporary stuff, but the long-term stuff. What I'm specifically referring to are the explicit memories. These are memories that we've stored from a long time ago, which are conscious and deliberately retrieved. So this is like retrieving previously learned information. And older adults do tend to have more difficulty doing that. And when they do retrieve these memories, they're more likely to omit certain pieces of information. So that memory is incomplete. And in some cases, it might just become false. It might become contaminated. So when we try to explicitly retrieve memories in old age, it can be problematic. But there is a kind of long-term memory that isn't negatively affected by old age, and that's called implicit memory. This refers to like a unconscious automatic memory based on previously learned information that is kind of just instinctively performed. So yeah, this is not really affected by age. And if you're wondering what exactly an implicit memory is, it's like how to drive a car. It's like how to ride a bike or how to play a musical instrument. You know, when a person gets to very old age, they can still perform these tasks relatively well. They remember all the steps required to perform these tasks. Even if they forget everything else, these kinds of memories stay intact. So implicit memories are largely resistant to these kinds of negative effects of memory retrieval in old age. But memory problems in old age, it's pretty normal. You know, most people are pretty worried about it as they start to grow older and they start forgetting things. They start to get kind of concerned about it. But for the most part, it's probably normal. We would only consider memory loss a serious problem if these things you're forgetting are interfering with your everyday life. Like if you lose your car keys, that's annoying. But you'll probably be able to find them if you just look around for a few minutes. But if you have no idea whose car is in your driveway, that's something to be more concerned about. It's like if you don't remember that car is your car, that's going to cause an interference, right? Like it's kind of hard to judge when you're the one suffering from the memory problems, but other people will be able to clearly see how severe it is based upon the level of impairment you're experiencing. But as for like clinical tests, like standardized tests for memory, there's no easy way to assess how serious these memory problems are. It does require numerous like physical and neurological examinations and batteries of neuropsychological tests. But you typically don't need to worry about that kind of stuff. If you just have a loved one observe you, you'll probably be able to determine if you have a problem or not. It's usually fairly obvious. And if it is determined that you do have a memory problem, there are things you could do about it. There are various kinds of treatments and interventions and like support programs that can help you to remember things better, such as the EI-EIO framework. Now, each letter stands for a different part. So EI, the first EI, stands for explicit implicit. So this refers to whether you're aware or unaware of something's present, or whether there's a memory cue for it. And then the other EI stands for external internal, whether the memory cue is within the environment or within yourself. And then that O stands for like aha, like, you know, you just remembered it. That's like the eureka moment. So it combines all these different kinds of memories into one framework to help you better remember things when you're getting to old age and you're having more difficulty with that kind of stuff. Besides memory issues, we also see some declines in creative skill as the individual reaches old age. Creativity can be easily defined as just the ability to produce new ideas, the ability to produce work that connects disparate ideas in new ways. It's all about just coming up with something new, basically. And we can actually predict how creative a person is by looking at how much white matter, you know, that myelin, how much white matter connects distant regions of the brain. And generally we see creative skill increase through the 30s, peak in the 40s, and then gradually decline. So I'm not saying that elders can't be creative. I'm just saying they've passed their peak at this point. Most individuals peak earlier in life, around middle age. But there is one feature of being an elder that is strongly beneficial and when it comes to like cognitive skills and cognitive potential. And that's the connotation of calling somebody an elder. Whenever you refer to somebody an elder, you're basically implying that they're knowledgeable. that they're wise. Gaining wisdom, it's not actually related to being older. Wisdom is not related to age, but a lot of elders are wise because they've had a wide variety of life experiences. The more experiences you have, the more wisdom you'll acquire. So elders typically have had more experiences in life, and as a result, they've gained more wisdom. Now, wisdom has 4 basic characteristics. Number 1, it has to do with dealing with important matters of life and the human experience. A lot of elders are deeply concerned with, what really matters in life. The second characteristic of wisdom is that they just have superior knowledge, judgment, and advice. They can just give better advice as a result of all this experience they've had. The third characteristic is that their knowledge has extraordinary scope, depth, and balance. They can see the connections between different ideas and different situations. They understand how various, seemingly unconnected things actually are connected in, sometimes abstract ways. And the fourth characteristic is that they have all this knowledge based on this experience, and this kind of fuels them with this desire to help. They want to give back. They want to use what they've learned, what they've gained, to help others, to potentially avoid mistakes they may have made, or to just make the world a better place. It's all about wanting to do some good. Now, when it comes to mental health issues in later life, a lot of times people associate depression with that. But in truth, healthy elders, ones that don't have any chronic health issues, they're actually less depressed than younger adults. Just to give you some statistics, 9% of younger adults tend to be clinically depressed, whereas only 4.5% of older people living in the same community would be diagnosed with depression. But if they do have chronic health conditions, then that number is going to be much higher. So that's the big point here, is that if the elder is free of these, often disabling health conditions, then they're going to have a relatively good state of mind. They're going to have a good mental health. Now, depression is more common in certain groups than others. We see more depression in immigrant Latinos and older Latino and European Americans. And the sad thing is about a lot of these individuals suffering from depression is that fewer than 40% of US adults receive adequate treatment for their depression. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's basically just comes down to a few simple things. Either they don't want to admit that they have a problem, and that's pretty common in some cultures, or they just can't afford it. Now, when you're looking at an elder who is potentially suffering from depression, the most prominent symptom that you should be looking for is something we call dysphoria. That's just a technical term to refer to that sad and down feeling that you get when you're depressed. But elders aren't very likely to describe this as sadness or depression. Older people are more likely to describe their dysphoria as a feeling of helplessness or tiredness. There's other signs as well of depression in older adults, like loss of appetite, insomnia, trouble breathing, and memory problems. But sometimes it's very hard to tell depression, like these symptoms of depression, apart from other diseases of old age. They have to be very carefully evaluated to make sure that this is in fact depression and not something else that's causing these symptoms. But when it comes to chronic diseases of old age, when it comes to disabling conditions, one of the ones that we most strongly associate with old age is Alzheimer's disease. It's so strongly associated with being an old individual that a lot of people mistakenly call it old-timers disease. So Alzheimer's is actually a kind of dementia. Dementia just refers to any disease that involves serious impairment of behavioral and cognitive functioning and some form of permanent damage to the brain. Now, Alzheimer's in particular is marked by gradual declines in memory, both long and short term, attention and awareness, judgment, self-control, ability to communicate, self-care skills, like, hygiene, personality integration, and bladder and bowel control, or you could just call it incontinence. So an individual who's suffering from Alzheimer's disease, they'll progressively become more and more incapable of just understanding the world around them and taking care of themselves. It's very heartbreaking to see somebody go through the various stages of this disease. And my grandmother, unfortunately, she did have to suffer through this, and we all got to see firsthand like how this can affect a person. I don't really want to talk about it because it was very sad, but let's just say it is completely disabling. In advanced Alzheimer's, this individual can no longer function in any independent form. But the thing that's interesting about Alzheimer's is, despite the intensive research we've done, there is no clear sign that this is Alzheimer's definitely and not something else. All the signs that it's Alzheimer's, they could in fact be something else. The only way to be sure that your loved one had Alzheimer's is to do an autopsy. What they'll find during that autopsy is a very large number of those neurofibrillary tangles that I mentioned earlier, and various kinds of structural neural changes and amyloid plaques. Basically, the brain is breaking down. Parts of the brain are starting to malfunction and die, to put it simply. While this is the only way to be sure, there are several brief screening methods that we've developed to try to identify Alzheimer's, before the person has passed on. Now, as for the cause and treatments for Alzheimer's, we're still working on it. They're still being studied. There seems to be a difference between early onset versus late onset Alzheimer's. There may in fact be multiple kinds of Alzheimer's, but we've not yet developed any cure or vaccine or anything like that. Drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, they provide relatively little long-term relief. Now, we can help to alleviate some of the symptoms using cognitive techniques like spaced retrieval or that EIEIO framework I mentioned earlier. Montessori education also seems to help. But yeah, there's no cure for this. So if, like me, you unfortunately have a loved one suffer from Alzheimer's, we don't currently have a solution for that. We're still working on it. Hopefully the science will get there very soon. Now, that's kind of a sad note, but something much more positive is the research we've done on Parkinson's disease, which is another pretty disabling condition of old age. The primary symptoms of Parkinson's are slow hand tremors, shaking, rigidity, walking problems, difficulties getting in and out of a chair. So it's mostly like a motor thing. The person's motor neurons, motor skills are starting to deteriorate. And this is caused by deteriorating dopamine production in the midbrain. So we actually pretty well understand what's going on here. Now, some of the individuals who develop Parkinson's disease will develop cognitive impairments and eventually dementia, so 30 to 50% of them. And we do actually have some pretty effective treatments using drugs that raise the dopamine or aid its delivery to the brain. So you could just call these neurostimulators. So yeah, like I said, compared to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease is pretty optimistic. We have a pretty good idea of what's going on, and we've already started to develop some pretty effective treatments. Obviously, there's still a lot of room to go, but we're doing pretty good on Parkinson's disease. Another disease that we understand very well, but we don't really have any possible cure at the moment, is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. Now, we understand what this is. This is a form of dementia caused by repeated head trauma, such as concussions. We see this commonly in athletes, especially athletes that play a lot of like full contact kind of games, like football or boxing, maybe even soccer. The whole idea here is if you're hitting your head repeatedly, if you're getting knocked out repeatedly throughout the span of your life, that's going to start to accumulate. The damage that's being done every time you get knocked out is progressively getting worse. And this CTE it's not just a sports thing. It can be related to, of course, any situation, any occupation where you're likely to suffer from head trauma, from brain damage, such as military combat. And emerging evidence shows that irrespective of the cause, there's structural damage to various parts of the brain that have to do with executive functions and memory. So individuals who are suffering from CTE, as they move into old age, the damage is obviously done throughout life, but as they move into old age, you start to see those problems with executive function begin to manifest. The person starts just having difficulty understanding simple things and being able to manage their own emotions. In fact, a lot of athletes who have unfortunately suffered from CTE, they become so distraught and so out of control that they actually wind up taking their own lives. This is a very serious disease, and it's one that we have to pay attention to because of how big and how powerful, our national football teams are and whatnot. So even if we really, really want to support the team, we have to understand what it's doing to the players.